The rope burned her palms. The rain lashed against her face. But the fear of what lay inside the bedroom was far worse than the fall. She had 20 feet to the ground, and a diamond necklace sewn into her hem, enough to disappear forever. But just as her slipper found purchase on the wet ivy, a hand of iron clamped around her wrist. It wasn't the wind that froze her blood, but the low, calm voice that rumbled from the darkness above. "The trellis is rot, my dear. Tell me, where do you think you're going, wife?" Thunder rattled the single-pane glass of the master suite at Ashford Manor, drowning out the frantic beat of Charlotte's heart. She stood on the precipice of the stone sill, her satin nightgown soaked through within seconds of opening the window. The wind howled across the Yorkshire moors, a desolate sound that usually made her pull the duvet tighter, but tonight the storm was her only ally. Charlotte adjusted the leather satchel strapped across her chest. It contained 3 items: a letter of transit forged by a shady clerk in Leeds, a pouch of gold sovereigns she had slowly siphoned from the household accounts over 4 months, and a small silver locket that belonged to her mother. She didn't look back at the massive 4-poster bed where the Duke of Ashford, Benedict Lancaster, supposedly slept. He was a heavy sleeper or so, the servants said, a man who drank deep of his brandy and slept the sleep of the arrogant. Charlotte swung one leg over the sill. The ivy looked thick, but as she tested her weight, the wet leaves slicked away under her velvet slipper. She gasped, her foot slipping into the void. She scrabbled for the stone frame, her fingernails breaking against the granite. She stabilized herself. "Breathe," she commanded. "Just get to the ground. The carriage is waiting at the crossroads." She began to lower her torso out of the window, the rain blinding her. She reached for the thickest branch of the trellis. Suddenly, the room behind her didn't feel empty anymore. The air shifted. It wasn't a sound, the thunder was too loud for that. It was a pressure. A sudden, terrifying awareness that she was being watched. Before she could vault, a hand clamped around her upper arm. It was massive, warm, and immovable. Charlotte screamed, the sound torn away by the wind as she was hauled back inside with terrifying ease. She tumbled onto the Persian rug, wet and shivering, the satchel sliding off her shoulder. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in a stark blue-white burst. Benedict Lancaster stood over her. He was not asleep. He was not even in his night clothes. He was fully dressed in a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal thick forearms and dark breeches. He looked like a statue carved from granite, his face unreadable in the shadows, save for the dangerous glint in his grey eyes. He didn't yell. He walked over to the window, closed it against the gale, and latched it with a decisive click. The silence that followed was suffocating. "The trellis is rot, Charlotte," Benedict said, his voice low, a baritone rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "It would have snapped before you reached the first floor. You would have broken your neck." Charlotte scrambled backward until her back hit the heavy oak wardrobe. Better a broken neck than another night in this house. Benedict turned slowly. He picked up the candle from the bedside table, the flame flickering as he moved closer. "Is it really that bad? The food is hot, the sheets are silk, and I have barely spoken a word to you in 3 months. That," Charlotte spat, pushing wet hair out of her eyes, "is exactly the problem. You bought me Benedict. You didn't marry me." "I paid your father's debts," he corrected, his face impassive. "There is a distinction. My father sold me to cover his losses at the racing tables, and you accepted the trade like I was a brood mare." She tried to stand, her dignity warring with her terror. "I am leaving. You cannot keep me here." Benedict looked at the satchel on the floor. He bent down, picking it up. He could feel the weight of the gold coins. He opened the flap, glancing at the forged papers. Mrs. Charlotte Miller. He read the fake name on the transit papers. A widow traveling to Liverpool. He looked up, his expression hardening. A widow. Am I dead in this fantasy of yours, or did you plan to arrange that too? I just want to be free, she whispered, her defiance crumbling into exhaustion. Benedict tossed the bag onto the bed. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides. Charlotte flinched, expecting a strike. Her father had been a man who used his fists when the cards went against him. But Benedict stopped a foot away. He reached out his hand, hovering near her face. She squeezed her eyes shut. He didn't hit her. His thumb brushed a raindrop from her cheek. The touch was startlingly gentle, at odds with the sheer size of the man. You are a duchess, he said, his voice devoid of warmth, but also devoid of malice. And you are my wife. You do not climb out of windows, and you certainly do not run to Liverpool to be preyed upon by every cut purse on the docks. Then let me go legally. An annulment. No. Why? She cried. You don't love me. You don't even know me. Benedict turned his back to her, walking toward the fireplace where the embers were dying. He placed a hand on the mantelpiece, looking into the ash. Because Charlotte, he said, his voice dropping so low she had to strain to hear it. If you leave this house tonight, the men who are watching the perimeter will kill you before you reach the gatehouse. Charlotte froze. What? Benedict looked over his shoulder, and for the first time she saw fear in the eyes of the Iron Duke. You think I keep you in this tower to control you? I keep you here to keep you alive. The revelation hung in the damp air of the bedroom like smoke. Charlotte stared at her husband. Benedict Lancaster, the Duke of Ashford, was known throughout London society as a cold, calculating industrialist. He owned half the steel mills in the north and shipping lines that stretched to India. He was a man of ledgers and bottom lines, not conspiracy theories. You're lying, Charlotte said, though her voice wavered. You're trying to scare me into submission. Benedict sighed, a weary sound that made him look older than his 32 years. He walked over to a heavy oak desk in the corner of the room, unlocked a drawer with a key he kept on a chain around his neck, and pulled out a stack of correspondence. Sit down, Charlotte. I prefer to stand. Sit down. He barked the command sharp enough to make her knees buckle. She sat on the edge of the velvet chaise. Benedict handed her the top letter. The paper was coarse, the ink smeared as if written in haste. It was addressed to him. My Lord Duke, the payment is late. We know the girl is at Ashford. If the ledger is not returned by the equinox, we will take the girl as collateral. Her father's debt was not merely monetary. Charlotte read the words twice, her hands trembling. My father. He owed money to the banks. Your father owed money to everyone, Benedict said, pouring himself a glass of water from a pitcher. He didn't offer her any, his mind clearly racing elsewhere. But the gambling debts were a cover. Sir Thomas, your father, was involved in a smuggling ring moving French brandy and gunpowder through the southern ports. He was the bookkeeper. That's impossible. Charlotte denied, though a cold knot formed in her stomach. It explained so much. The late-night visitors at their old estate, the way her father would sweat when the post arrived, the sudden desperate urgency to marry her off to the most powerful man he could find. He stole their ledger, Benedict continued, a book containing the names of every corrupt magistrate, captain and lord involved in the trade. He thought it was his insurance policy. Instead, it was a death warrant. And he gave it to you. Benedict laughed, a harsh, humorless bark. No. He told them he gave it to me. He used my reputation as a shield. He told the syndicate that the Duke of Ashford held the evidence, and if anything happened to him or his daughter, the Duke would release it to the Crown. Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. So you married me. To validate the lie, Benedict finished. If I married you, it made the claim plausible. It signaled to them that we were allied. It bought you protection under my name. You saved me, she whispered. I bought time, he corrected. But they are growing impatient. They believe I have the ledger. I do not, and until I find where your father hid it, this house is the only fortress strong enough to hold them back. Charlotte looked at the man she had despised for 3 months. She had seen him as a jailer. She had mocked his silence at dinner, interpreting it as disdain. She had hated him for his wealth while her family crumbled. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Because you are impulsive, Benedict said, gesturing to the open window and the rain-slicked floor. Because you are young, and you wear your heart on your sleeve, and if you knew the truth, you would try to be a hero. Or worse, you would panic. I'm not a child, Benedict. Tonight you climbed out of a 3rd-story window into a storm with a bag of trinkets, he countered. That is the act of a child. Charlotte flushed. She stood up, the damp nightgown clinging to her skin. I did it because I thought I was alone. I thought I had no one. Benedict looked at her, then his gaze dropping to her trembling hands. The anger in his eyes softened into something more complex, regret perhaps. You are not alone, Charlotte, he said quietly, but you are in danger, and climbing down that trellis would have delivered you right into the hands of men who would cut your throat to send me a message. He walked to the bell pull. What are you doing? She asked. Calling the maid. You need dry clothes and a hot drink. You're shivering. I don't want the maid, Charlotte said, surprising herself. I want to know the plan. If they are watching the house, how do we get out? How do we find the ledger? Benedict paused his hand on the rope. He studied her for a long moment, reassessing the woman who stood before him. He saw the fear, yes, but he also saw the set of her jaw. She was Sir Thomas's daughter after all. She had grit. We don't get out, Benedict said. We invite them in. The following morning, Ashford Manor was a hive of activity. To the outside observer, it appeared the Duke and Duchess were preparing for the annual Hunt Ball, a prestigious event that drew the aristocracy from as far as London. Inside the library, however, the atmosphere was grim. Benedict paced in front of the fireplace. Charlotte sat at the massive mahogany desk, a pen in her hand, staring at a list of names Benedict had dictated. Lord Harrington, Benedict said. He's the contact for the northern distribution. If anyone knows who is running the syndicate, now that your father is gone, it is him. Harrington? Charlotte frowned. He is the magistrate. He judged the county fair last year. He gave me a ribbon for my embroidery. He also takes a 20% cut of every barrel of illicit powder that comes through the docks, Benedict said dryly. He is coming to the ball tonight. So the ball is a trap, Charlotte realized. The ball is a distraction, Benedict corrected. While the eyes of society are on the champagne and the dancing, my agents will be searching Harrington's carriage and his temporary quarters in the village. We need to know who is pulling his strings. And what is my role? Charlotte asked. Benedict stopped pacing. He walked over to the desk, placing his hands flat on the surface and leaning in. In the daylight, Charlotte noticed the lines of fatigue around his eyes. He hadn't slept after their confrontation. Your role, he said, is to be the perfect, happy Duchess. You must convince Harrington that we are ignorant, that we are a love match, consumed by our own domestic bliss, completely unaware of the threats circling us. If he thinks we are relaxed, he might slip up." "A love match," Charlotte repeated, feeling a strange flutter in her chest. "That will be difficult, considering the staff knows we sleep in separate wings." "Then we must give them a show," Benedict said. He reached out, taking her chin in his hand. His skin was rough, calloused from fencing and riding. "Can you act, Charlotte? Can you look at me as if I am the sun and the moon?" Charlotte looked into his grey eyes. Last night they had been terrifying. Today they were intense, focused, and protective. "I can try," she said softly. "Good." He released her, straightening up briskly. "Wear the emeralds. The necklace is heavy, but it displays wealth and confidence. Harrington responds to power." As Benedict turned to leave the library, Charlotte called out, "Benedict." He paused at the door. "Yes, my father." She hesitated. Did he say anything about me? Before he died?" Benedict's shoulders stiffened. He didn't turn around. "He said you were the only thing of value he ever produced." He walked out, leaving Charlotte alone with the list of names and the sudden stinging realization that her husband knew more about her family's tragedy than he was letting on. The Hunt Ball was a suffocating affair of velvet perfume and hushed gossip. The ballroom of Ashford Manor was lit by 1,000 beeswax candles, the heat oppressive. Charlotte stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hand resting on Benedict's arm. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, the neckline plunging enough to be fashionable, but modest enough for a duchess. Around her neck, the Ashford emeralds glittered heavy and cold against her skin. "Smile," Benedict murmured, leaning close to her ear. To the onlookers below, it looked like a lover's whisper. "Harrington is at the punch bowl. The man in the red waistcoat." Charlotte scanned the crowd. She saw Lord Harrington, a portly man with a flushed face, laughing loudly at something a young debutante had said. It was chilling to think that this buffoon was capable of murder. "He looks harmless," she whispered back. "The viper often looks like a stick until you step on it," Benedict replied. "Shall we?" They descended the stairs. As they moved through the crowd, Benedict was attentive in a way she had never seen. He fetched her drinks. He kept a hand on the small of her back, a possessive, warm weight that grounded her. When he spoke to her, he focused entirely on her face, ignoring the other lords vying for his attention. It was acting. She knew it was acting. But as they waltzed to a slow, sweeping melody, and his hand tightened on her waist, pulling her flush against him, Charlotte found herself forgetting the script. "You are trembling," Benedict said quietly as they spun near the terrace doors. "I am terrified," she admitted. "Do not be. I have you." "Benedict," she asked, looking up at him. "Where is the ledger? Truly, if my father didn't give it to you, where is it?" Benedict spun her again, expertly, maneuvering them away from a prying ear. "I believe," he said, his lips brushing her temple, "that he didn't hide it in a place. He hid it in a person." Charlotte missed a step. "What? Think, Charlotte. Your father was a bookkeeper. He didn't trust vaults. He trusted patterns. He sent you letters, didn't he? Every week while you were at finishing school." "Yes, but they were just ramblings, weather reports, gossip." "Or codes," Benedict said. "We need to find those letters." I burned them, Charlotte said, her heart plummeting. When I packed to come here, I was angry at him. I burned them all. Benedict stopped dancing. They were in the middle of the floor, couples swirling around them. His face went pale. All of them? He demanded, his facade of the loving husband slipping for a fraction of a second. Yes, except, Charlotte's eyes widened. Except the last one, the one he sent the day before he died. I kept it because it had a poem in it. He never read poetry. Where is it? Benedict's grip on her arm became painful. In my jewelry box. Upstairs. Get it. Benedict commanded, his voice tight. Go now. Use the servants' stairs. Do not let Harrington see you leave. Charlotte pulled away, feigning a headache. She turned to rush toward the side exit, but a figure stepped into her path. It was Lord Harrington. His face was red, sweating, and his smile did not reach his eyes. Duchess, Harrington boomed. Leaving so soon. The night is young, and I haven't had a chance to admire your necklace. He wasn't looking at the emeralds. He was looking at the pulse frantically beating in her throat. I am just fetching a handkerchief, my lord, Charlotte stammered. I'll escort you, Harrington said, offering his arm. It wasn't a request. The corridors are so dark in these old houses. One could easily get lost, or hurt. Charlotte looked back for Benedict, but he had been cornered by 3 heavy-set men near the orchestra. They weren't dancing. They were blocking him. The trap hadn't been for Harrington. The trap was for them. The orchestra swelled into a crescendo, masking the sudden violent tension rippling through the ballroom. Charlotte's arm was trapped in Lord Harrington's grip. His fingers dug into her bicep, bruising the tender skin beneath the emerald silk. You are hurting me, my lord, Charlotte hissed, trying to pull away without drawing the attention of the surrounding couples. And you are testing my patience, my lady. Harrington smiled, his teeth yellowed and predatory. We know the Duke does not have the ledger. We tore apart his London office last night. Burned it to the ground, actually. Did he not tell you? Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. Benedict hadn't mentioned a fire. He hadn't mentioned that the war had already started. If he doesn't have it, Harrington whispered, leaning in close enough that she smelled the stale port on his breath. Then you must know where it is. Your father was a sentimental fool. He would have left a breadcrumb for his precious daughter. Suddenly, a shadow fell over them. Harrington! A voice like crushed gravel spoke. Benedict stood there. He was slightly disheveled. His cravat was crooked, and his knuckles were raw, split open, and bleeding. The 3 thugs who had cornered him near the orchestra were nowhere to be seen, though a waiter was hurriedly mopping up a spilled tray of champagne near the pillars where a struggle had clearly taken place. Harrington released Charlotte, instantly smoothing his red waistcoat. Ashford, I was just admiring your wife's fortitude. Admire her from a distance, Benedict said. He didn't shout, but the menace in his tone caused a ripple of silence to spread through the nearby guests. He stepped between Charlotte and the magistrate, using his broad shoulders as a physical shield. The carriage is brought around, Charlotte. You are unwell. Charlotte blinked, then caught the urgency in his eyes. Yes, the heat. I feel faint. A pity, Harrington said, his eyes narrowing. Do take care, Duke. The roads are treacherous tonight. Accidents happen with alarming frequency. I'll keep that in mind, Benedict replied softly. Come, my dear. He grabbed Charlotte's hand, not gently this time, but with a desperate grip, and hauled her toward the servants' exit. They didn't walk. They marched. As soon as the heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, muffling the music, the facade dropped. "Run," Benedict commanded. They sprinted down the narrow corridor, past startled maids and footmen. Benedict took the stairs 2 at a time, pulling Charlotte along. They burst into the master suite, and Benedict immediately slammed the deadbolt home. He dragged a heavy chest of drawers in front of the door. "Benedict, your hand!" Charlotte gasped, seeing the blood dripping onto the carpet. "Broken jaw," he said dismissively, referring to one of the men he'd dispatched downstairs. "Focus, Charlotte. The letter. Where is it?" Charlotte rushed to her jewelry box. Her hands shook so badly, she fumbled the key twice. Finally, the lid popped open. Beneath a string of pearls lay a crumpled, yellowing piece of parchment. "Here," she breathed, handing it to him. Benedict snatched it, moving to the fireplace for better light. He scanned the scrawl. "It's nonsense. The heavy rain falls on the grey sheep. The shepherd sleeps while the wolf does creep. Time stands still where the iron bird flies. Look to the center of the giant's eyes." "He wrote it 2 days before he died," Charlotte said. "I thought his mind was going. He never wrote poetry." Benedict paced the room, the paper crinkling in his fist. Sheep, wolf, iron bird. It's a code, a simple substitution cipher. No, Thomas was more clever than that. It's a riddle of location. "Iron bird," Charlotte whispered. "Benedict the weather vane on the old chapel. It's a rooster made of iron." "Too obvious," Benedict muttered. "Harrington's men have already tossed the chapel. They dug up the graves." "They what?" "They are desperate. Charlotte, they are losing money every day that the ledger is missing." Benedict stopped pacing. He looked at her, his grey eyes intense. "Read the last line again. Look to the center of the giant's eyes." Charlotte frowned. "There are no giants in Yorkshire. Only folklore. Not a literal giant," Benedict said, his mind working furiously. "An industrial one." He looked at the window where the storm was raging again. "The giant is what the locals call the Great Furnace at the Westmore Foundry. My foundry." "Your foundry?" "The oldest blast furnace in the district. It has 2 massive circular ventilation windows at the top. They look like eyes when the fire is lit. And the iron bird. The crane." Benedict realized a spark of hope lighting his face. "The loading crane that sits above the furnace. It looks like a heron when it's locked in position." "He hid the ledger in your own factory?" Charlotte asked, incredulous. "It's the perfect hiding spot," Benedict said, a grim smile forming. "He knew I owned it. He knew I rarely went to the furnace floor myself, leaving it to the foreman. It's hiding in plain sight, protected by my own guards." A loud crash echoed from the hallway. Wood splintered. "They are here," Benedict said calmly. He blew out the candle, plunging the room into darkness. "Harrington isn't waiting for an accident. He's coming to finish this." "The window," Charlotte said, rushing to it. "The trellis." "No." Benedict grabbed her. "The trellis is death. We go up, to the roof." The rain was torrential. It lashed against the slate tiles of Ashford Manor, making the steep pitch as slippery as ice. Benedict climbed out of the dormer window first, bracing his boots against the gutter. He reached back and Charlotte took his hand. She was no longer the frightened girl who had tried to flee the night before. She was angry. Angry at her father for leaving her this mess, angry at Harrington for hunting them, and strangely fiercely determined to survive alongside the man holding her hand. "Don't look down," Benedict shouted over the wind. "Follow my footsteps exactly." They crawled along the ridge of the roof. Below in the courtyard, they could see carriage lamps and men shouting. The front doors had been breached. "Where are we going?" Charlotte yelled, her wet hair plastering to her face. "The stables are too far," Benedict shouted back. "There is a coal chute on the north side. It leads to the cellar. From there, a tunnel runs to the river." "A tunnel? You have a tunnel?" "I have many secrets, wife." They reached the north side. The drop was terrifying, 3 stories down into a dark, stone-paved alley. Benedict found the iron rungs of a maintenance ladder bolted to the brickwork. It was rusted, groaning under the wind. "I go first," he said. "If it breaks, you climb back inside and hide in the chimney." "If you fall, I'm coming after you," she retorted. Benedict paused, looking at her in the rain. For a second, the danger vanished. He looked at her with a raw, intense appreciation. "You are a stubborn woman, Charlotte Lancaster." "I learned from the best." He descended. The metal groaned but held. Charlotte followed her satin slippers, ruined her hands, scraped raw by the rust. When they hit the ground, they didn't stop. Benedict kicked open a wooden hatch, half hidden by overgrown nettles, and they slid down a coal chute into the pitch-black darkness of the cellar. They tumbled onto a pile of coal dust, coughing and gasping. Benedict was up instantly, pulling Charlotte to her feet. He navigated the dark cellar with memory alone, finding a hidden latch behind a wine rack. The wall swung open, revealing a damp earthen tunnel. "This leads to the boathouse on the river," Benedict said, lighting a lantern he had grabbed from the wall. "From there, we take the skiff to the foundry." "Benedict," Charlotte said, grabbing his arm as they hurried through the narrow passage, "why did you really marry me? You said it was to validate the lie. But you could have just taken the ledger and left me to the wolves. Why shackle yourself to a bankrupt gambler's daughter?" Benedict didn't stop walking, the lantern swinging in his hand, casting long, dancing shadows. "Because I knew your father. He was a fool, yes. But he loved you. He showed me your picture once, years ago, before the gambling took his soul. He said you were too good for this world." He stopped, then turning to face her in the cramped tunnel. The coal dust smeared on his cheekbone made him look dangerous, but his eyes were unguarded. "When he came to me begging for help, I saw the terror in him. Not for himself. For you. I made a deal. I told him I would protect you no matter the cost. I didn't expect," he trailed off. "Expect what?" Charlotte stepped closer. "I didn't expect to actually like you," Benedict admitted, his voice rough. "I thought you would be a vapid socialite. Instead, I find myself married to a woman who climbs out of windows and solves ciphers in the middle of a siege." Charlotte's heart hammered against her ribs louder than the storm outside. She reached up, wiping the coal dust from his cheek. "I didn't expect to find a hero in a counting-house duke." Benedict caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. It was brief, desperate, and electric. "We are not safe yet, Charlotte. Save the flattery, for when we are alive." They reached the end of the tunnel. The river roared outside, swollen by the rain. Benedict unmoored a small wooden skiff. "Get in," he ordered. "The current is strong. We have to ride it down to the industrial district." As they pushed off into the black water, a gunshot rang out. A bullet splintered the wood of the boat, missing Charlotte's ear by inches. "Down!" Benedict roared, throwing himself over her as he rowed with one arm, using his body as a shield. On the riverbank, silhouetted by lightning, stood Lord Harrington and 3 of his men. They had anticipated the river. "Row, Benedict!" Charlotte screamed. Benedict pulled on the oars with superhuman strength, the boat surging into the chaotic current. Another shot rang out, hitting Benedict in the shoulder. He grunted, faltering, but didn't stop. "Benedict, it's nothing," he gritted out, though his face was grey with pain. "Keep your head down." The river swept them away into the darkness, leaving Harrington cursing on the bank. But they were heading straight into the heart of the storm toward the fires of the foundry. The Westmore foundry rose out of the darkness like a mechanical cathedral, a towering skeleton of iron and brick illuminated by the hellish glow of the work within. Even at midnight, the industry of Yorkshire did not sleep. The air here was thick, tasting of sulphur ash and the metallic tang of molten ore. Benedict and Charlotte abandoned the splintered skiff a mile downstream, scrambling up the muddy bank as the river raged behind them. They moved through the shadows of the rail yard, weaving between silent, rusted locomotives and stacks of timber. Benedict was failing. The adrenaline that had carried him through the river escape was ebbing, replaced by the cold shock of blood loss. His white shirt was no longer white. A dark crimson blossom had spread across the entire right side, matting the fabric to his skin. He leaned heavily on Charlotte, his breathing ragged and shallow. "We have to stop," Charlotte pleaded, dragging him behind a stack of railway ties as the sound of carriage wheels echoed on the cobblestones near the main gate. "Benedict, you are bleeding through the binding. Let me look at it." "There is no time." Benedict wheezed, sliding down the wood to sit in the dirt. His face was grey sweat beading on his forehead, despite the bitter cold of the night. Harrington isn't stupid. He saw the direction of the current. He knows we came here. He gripped her wrist, his hand trembling, but his grip still surprisingly strong. "He knows the riddle now, Charlotte. The center of the giant's eyes. He is coming for the crane." Charlotte looked up. High above the central blast furnace, a roaring vat of liquid fire that cast dancing, terrifying shadows against the brick walls hung the loading crane. It was a monstrous structure of chains and gears suspended 60 feet in the air. The operator's cab, a small metal cage, sat directly over the heat. "The maintenance box?" Benedict rasped. "Under the seat in the cab. That is where your father hid it." "I'll go," Charlotte said, fear clutching at her throat. "I'll climb up and get it." "You can't." Benedict tried to push himself up, but his arm gave way, and he slumped back with a groan of pain. It's too dangerous. The heat alone. Look at you, Benedict," Charlotte cried, her voice cracking. "You can barely stand, let alone climb a vertical ladder. If you try, you will fall. And if we stay here, Harrington will find us and kill us both." She knelt before him, tearing a strip from the hem of her ruined emerald gown. She pressed it firmly against his shoulder, ignoring his sharp intake of breath. "I'm going up there. You are going to stay alive." Benedict looked at her. In the firelight, the society debutante was gone. In her place was a woman of grit and steel, her face smudged with coal dust, her eyes blazing with a fierce determination. He reached into his belt and pulled out a heavy flintlock pistol. "It has one shot," he said, pressing the cold metal into her palm. "The powder is dry, thank God. Do not hesitate, Charlotte. If they corner you, do not hesitate." Charlotte closed her fingers around the weapon. It was heavy, a tool of death that felt alien in her hand, yet strangely necessary. "I won't." "Go," he whispered. "And don't look down." Charlotte turned and ran toward the base of the crane. The heat hit her like a physical wall as she approached the furnace. It seared her eyes and dried the moisture from her throat instantly. The noise was deafening, the rhythmic clanking of chains, the roar of the bellows, the hiss of steam. She began the climb. The metal rungs were slick with grease and hot to the touch. Her satin slippers offered no grip, forcing her to rely on the strength of her arms. 10 feet, 20. The muscles in her shoulders burned, screaming in protest. Her dress, heavy with rainwater and mud, felt like an anchor dragging her down. She reached the first catwalk, 30 feet up. She paused, gasping for air that felt too thin to breathe. She made the mistake of looking down. Below the foundry floor was a chaotic tapestry of shadows and fire. And there, moving through the main gates, were figures. Men in long coats. They were swarming the yard, guns drawn. Harrington had arrived. Panic flared in her chest, hot and sharp. She forced it down. "Climb," she commanded herself, "for Benedict." She scrambled up the second ladder, her movements frantic. She reached the crane's cab, suspended precariously over the open maw of the blast furnace. The molten iron below bubbled and popped a pool of liquid death that glowed a blinding white-orange. Charlotte yanked the door of the cab open. It screeched on rusty hinges. The interior was cramped, smelling of stale oil and old tobacco. She fell to her knees, frantically feeling under the metal seat. Her fingers brushed against cold iron. A box. A lead-lined welder's box, welded crudely to the underside of the chair. She grabbed a heavy wrench lying on the floorboard. With a grunt of effort, she smashed it against the padlock. Once, twice. On the third strike, the metal shattered. She tore the lid open. Inside lay a bundle of banknotes, a small fortune, and a thick leather-bound notebook. The ledger. The book that had cost her father his life. Her hands shook as she pulled them out. She had to secure them. She quickly shoved the items into the bodice of her dress, the stiff paper scratching her skin. "Found something, my dear." The voice cut through the roar of the furnace like a knife. Charlotte spun around, the pistol raised in a trembling hand. Lord Harrington stood on the narrow catwalk just outside the cab door. He was winded, his face flushed a deep, unhealthy red from the climb, but his smile was intact. It was a smile of pure, predatory triumph. In his hand he held a long-barreled revolver, leveled directly at her chest. "Put it down, Charlotte," he shouted over the din of the machinery. "You are a terrible shot, and my aim is excellent." "You killed him," Charlotte screamed, the grief finally breaking through the fear. "You killed my father. Your father was a thief who didn't know his place." Harrington sneered, stepping closer. The metal grating groaned under his weight. "He stole from the syndicate. He stole from me. I merely balanced the books." He held out his free hand, palm up. "Now, give me the box. I know it's there. I saw you take it." "If I give it to you, you'll kill us anyway," Charlotte said, backing up until her spine hit the control levers of the crane. "Perhaps." Harrington shrugged, his eyes dead and cold. "But if you give it to me, I might let the Duke die quickly. He looks to be in a bad way down there." Charlotte risked a glance over the railing. Far below, on the concrete floor, Benedict had been dragged out from behind the railway ties. He was on his knees, surrounded by 6 of Harrington's thugs. One of them had a gun pressed to the back of his head. Benedict looked up. Even from this distance, she could see the rage in his eyes, not at her, but for her. He struggled, and the guard struck him with the pistol butt. "Stop it!" Charlotte screamed. "The box, Duchess!" Harrington roared, losing his patience. "Give me the evidence, or you watch him die right now." Charlotte looked at the lead box in her hand. She looked at the bundle of banknotes she had just pulled from it. Then her gaze shifted to the vat of molten iron, bubbling directly beneath them. The heat rising from it was enough to blister skin. A desperate, reckless plan formed in her mind. It was madness. It was her only chance. "You want the evidence?" Charlotte yelled, her voice trembling with a potent mix of terror and fury. "You want the names, the dates, the bribes. Give it to me. Go get it." Charlotte wound her arm back and threw the lead box, along with the bundle of banknotes, not at Harrington, but out into the empty air, directly over the open mouth of the furnace. "No!" Harrington screamed, a sound of pure, agonized greed. It was an instinctual reaction, a fatal error of judgment, born of a man who valued gold more than breath. Harrington lunged for the falling package. He threw himself forward, reaching out over the railing to catch the box before it fell into the fire. But the railing was old. The heat of 50 years had warped the iron bolts. As Harrington's full weight hit the guardrail, the metal shrieked. Snap! The bolts sheared off. The railing gave way. Harrington didn't scream as he fell. He just looked at Charlotte, his eyes wide with disbelief, his hand still reaching for the money that fluttered just out of his grasp. He tumbled 60 feet, turning slowly in the air. He disappeared silently into the blinding white glow of the molten iron. There was a hiss, a sudden puff of black smoke, and he was gone, incinerated in an instant. The box followed him, consumed by the liquid fire. Charlotte stood frozen on the precipice, gripping the broken railing, staring into the abyss where a man had just existed. Below, the silence was absolute. The thugs holding Benedict looked up, their mouths open in horror. They had just watched the most powerful magistrate in the county vanish into a pot of melted steel. They were leaderless. They were confused. And Benedict the Iron Duke saw his opening. Despite the agony in his shoulder, he surged upward with the last reserves of his strength. He drove his good shoulder into the stomach of the man standing behind him, knocking the wind out of him. As the man doubled over, Benedict seized his fallen weapon. He didn't fire at the men. He fired a single shot into the air, the crack of the gunshot echoing like a cannon blast in the cavernous foundry. "He's dead!" Benedict roared, his voice booming with the authority of a man who commanded armies of industry. "Harrington is dead. The police are on their way. Leave now, and you live. Stay, and you burn with him." The mercenaries looked at the burning furnace, then at the enraged, bloodied giant of a man holding a gun, and finally at the wild-eyed woman on the crane above, who had just sent their boss to hell. They broke. Their loyalty had been bought with coin, not blood. With their paymaster gone, the fight was over. They dropped their weapons and fled, scattering like rats into the night, the sound of their boots fading into the dark. Charlotte's knees gave way. She collapsed onto the metal floor of the cab, the heat washing over her, clutching her chest, where the real letters were safely hidden against her heart. She sobbed a dry, racking sound. It was over. They had won. 3 weeks had passed since the fires of the Westmore foundry had burned Lord Harrington's ambition to ash. The storms that had plagued the Yorkshire moors for months had finally broken, replaced by a tentative pale spring sunshine that flooded the high windows of Ashford Manor. The house, once a fortress of shadows and unspoken threats, now felt strangely open. The heavy velvet drapes were pulled back, and for the first time since her arrival, Charlotte could see the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light, peaceful and undisturbed. Inside the library, Benedict Lancaster sat in his high-backed leather chair near the hearth. His left arm was bound securely in a black silk sling, a stark contrast to the crisp white of his shirt. He held a newspaper in his good hand, but Charlotte, pausing in the doorway, noticed that his eyes hadn't moved from the same paragraph in nearly 10 minutes. He was staring at nothing. His brow furrowed not in anger, but in a deep, contemplative silence. Charlotte adjusted the silver tray in her hands, the china teacups rattling softly. She took a breath to steady her nerves. The adrenaline of the chase had faded, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the danger ever had. In the chaos, they had been partners. In the quiet, they were strangers again. She stepped into the room. "The doctor says you should be resting, Benedict, not brooding over the London gazettes." Benedict looked up the tension in his jaw, easing instantly at the sight of her. "The doctor is a worrywart who thinks a bullet wound is an excuse for sloth." He grumbled, though he set the paper aside and accepted the cup she offered. His fingers brushed hers as he took the saucer. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt of warmth through her that had nothing to do with the tea. She sat on the velvet ottoman opposite him, smoothing the skirts of her blue muslin dress. "The magistrate from London left an hour ago," Benedict said quietly, breaking the silence. "He was thorough." "And?" Charlotte asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "And the matter is closed," Benedict replied, his voice steady. "With Harrington missing, presumed lost to the river, and the testimony of the foundry foreman regarding the unfortunate accident with the railing, the investigation has been suspended. The syndicate has fractured. Without their leader and fearing exposure, they have gone underground. We are safe, Charlotte. Truly." Charlotte let out a breath she felt she had been holding for days. "Safe," she whispered, tasting the word. It felt foreign. "However," Benedict continued, his expression darkening slightly, "there is the matter of your father's legacy. You believe you destroyed the ledger to save us." Charlotte looked down at her hands. "I did what I had to do. It was the only way to stop him. I chose your life over my father's reputation. I would do it again." "I know you would," Benedict said, a strange softness in his tone. "But you didn't have to." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket with his good hand. He pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. The cover was scorched, the edges curled from heat, and it smelled faintly of sulfur and smoke, but it was intact. Charlotte gasped, nearly dropping her teacup. But that's impossible. I threw it into the iron. I watched it burn." "You threw the decoy," Benedict corrected, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face, a smile that transformed him from the Iron Duke into something far more human. "I was watching you in the crane, Charlotte. I saw the moment you made the switch. I saw you throw the banknotes and the empty lead box to satisfy his greed while you tucked the real notebook into your bodice." Charlotte felt a flush rise to her cheeks. I wasn't sure if it would work. I am my father's daughter, after all. He taught me how to bluff a bad hand. I couldn't let Harrington win." "No," Benedict said softly, his eyes filled with a profound respect. "You couldn't. And because of that quick thinking, I have already sent certified copies to the Home Secretary. Your father is fully exonerated. His debts are cleared, and his name is restored." Tears pricked Charlotte's eyes, the weight that had sat on her shoulders since her father's funeral. The shame, the fear, the obligation finally evaporated. She was free. But as the relief washed over her, a cold realization followed in its wake. "So," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "the contract is fulfilled?" Benedict's smile faded. He watched her carefully. "Yes, the debt is paid." "Then I suppose I should pack." Charlotte stood up abruptly, unable to look at him. If she looked at him, she might beg. and she refused to lose her dignity now. "I can go to my aunt in Bath. She has always offered me shelter. You can file for an annulment on the grounds of non-consummation, or whatever legal avenue you prefer. No one in society would blame you. You are the Duke of Ashford. You need a wife who fits your station, not a smuggler's daughter who climbs industrial cranes." She turned toward the heavy oak door. Her heart was breaking, cracking right down the center with every step she took away from him. She had climbed out of his window 3 weeks ago to escape a prison. Now, walking out this door felt like being exiled from the only home she had ever known. She reached for the handle, her vision blurred by tears. "Charlotte?" The voice was low, vibrating through the quiet room. She froze her hand, hovering over the brass latch. "Where do you think you're going, wife?" The words were the same ones he had spoken that stormy night when he caught her on the sill. But the tone was entirely different. There was no command in it, no iron authority. There was only a question, a plea. She turned around, slowly. Benedict had risen from his chair. He was crossing the room toward her, ignoring the obvious pain in his shoulder, moving with a desperate urgency. He didn't stop until he was standing inches from her, close enough that she could smell the sandalwood soap and the faint scent of tobacco that clung to his coat. "The window is closed," he said softly, looking down at her. "The trellis has been repaired. But the door is unlocked. If you walk through it, I will not stop you. I will never keep you against your will again." He took a shaky breath, his grey eyes searching hers with a vulnerability she had never seen in him before. "But I would very much prefer it if you stayed. Not as a hostage, not as a duchess to wear my emeralds, but as my partner, my equal, my love." Charlotte stared at him, the air leaving her lungs. You love me?" "Charlotte, look at me," Benedict said, reaching out with his good hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "I climbed a slate roof in a hurricane for you. I took a bullet for you. I trusted you with my life in that foundry. Do you really think I did that for a contract?" He leaned his forehead against hers, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I didn't expect to find you, Charlotte. I thought I was marrying a burden. Instead, I found the only person in the world who is brave enough to stand beside me. I love you. I think the evidence is fairly conclusive." Charlotte laughed, a wet, teary sound that broke the tension. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and rested her head carefully against his uninjured shoulder. She felt the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I suppose it is," she murmured into his coat. "I love you too, Benedict. I think I have since you pulled me back through that window." Benedict wrapped his good arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him, anchoring her there. He kissed the top of her head, then tilted her chin up to press a lingering, promising kiss to her lips. "No more climbing out of windows?" he asked, a playful glint returning to his eyes. Charlotte smiled, feeling the sunlight warm on her back. "Only if you come with me." Benedict grinned, the shadows of the past finally banished from the room. "Deal." Outside, the Yorkshire wind whispered through the heather, and the ivy clung strong to the stone walls. But inside, the storm was finally over. And that is the story of how a climbing rope and a stormy night turned a cold marriage into a fight for survival. It turns out the Duke wasn't the villain. Charlotte thought he was. He was the only thing standing between her and the shadows of her father's past. If you enjoyed this story of romance, danger, and betrayal, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. What would you have done in Charlotte's shoes? Would you have trusted the Duke? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.